publishing is where all the money is. You write the song, you make the money. Every time that song is played by anybody at any time, AppScan, BMI, they keep a record of it, and you get paid. Well, I'll tell you what Morris used to do. He used to fraudulently put his name as one of the writers, one of the songwriters, and he would keep all the publishing. He beat a lot of his artists that way. And they were afraid to say anything because it was Morris. They knew his connections. They didn't want to say anything. He made millions in publishing, millions in publishing by, again, fraudulently saying that he was one of the writers of the songs. He did that all the time. Hello everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. It's now Friday, October 2nd. Would you believe it? We're already into October, even in this year of COVID. Time seems to be going pretty quickly. Anyway, good week for me actually. I was able to go on my first speaking event out of town since February. You know, I'm a pretty prolific speaker. I speak all over the world for the past 24, 25 years. Normally do 50 to 70 events a year. Been shut down because of COVID. But Wednesday and Thursday, I was in Indiana, did a breakfast. We practiced social distancing, several hundred people there. It was great to get back in action. So it was a good week. And today, we're going to do part 2 of the mob's infiltration into the music industry. And we had part 1 on Tuesday, got great responses. Thank you very much. And we're going to do part 2 today. And I got to talk to you today about Morris Levy. Morris Levy, another Jewish guy who was extremely influential in the music industry back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. As a matter of fact, his reach was so extensive that Variety magazine called him the octopus because his reach, you know, in accordance with the role that he played, he wasn't, you know, one of the major labels. He had his own label, Roulette Records, but his reach in the industry was so extensive, they called him the octopus. And again, I got to say, another Jewish guy. Morris was Jewish, obviously. And just like Meyer Lansky and Arnold Rothstein and Bugsy Siegel, he played a huge role in organized crime, in the mob in La Cosa Nostra here in America. And we had a great relationship with a lot of Jewish guys. They were very smart, and they were gangsters at heart, no question about it. And Morris Levy happened to be one of them. So he had a record label called Roulette Records, and he was mobbed up. You know, he had an association with a guy by the name of Tommy Eberle, who was at one time the boss of the Genovese family. He later got involved with the Chin, was very close to him. He had a lot of dealings with Tommy Vastola, Corky they called him. He was a soldier, later a capo with the DeCavalcante family. These were all influential guys, and Morris Levy was hooked up with all of them. My father had some involvement with him. Very influential guy. But anyway, he had a record label called Roulette Records, and he had a couple of different things that he would do, you know, a couple of different scams that he pulled that netted him, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars. He was really, really a heavyweight. He also had a chain of stores called Strawberry Records that he owned. I believe there were 60, 70, maybe 80 stores at that time. And a couple of scams that he was able to pull off quite successfully with the help of his organized crime connections. You know, one major one that he pulled off, I'll never forget, you know, and I'd learned about this, you know, from my dad and from my involvement in the record business, which wasn't nearly as extensive as his. But he would have a scam where he would pirate the masters of some major artists. He would pirate the masters, he would duplicate these masters, and he would fill the retail stores with them at a lower price than the record labels, the big labels, would sell them to the store. So these records were selling extensively. They were his records, he was getting the revenue, the major labels were getting nothing, and the artists were getting beat out of their royalties. Now the artists, okay, of course, would go into the stores and they'd see these records flying off the shelves, and they would go back to the labels and say, hey, you know, we see these stores stacked with our records, and yet we're not getting the royalties. What's going on? So the big labels, they do their investigation. They find out that there's counterfeit records going into the stores at a cheaper price. So who do they call? They call Morris Levy. They say, Morris, we got this problem. These record companies, they're selling counterfeit records. Our artists are not getting the royalties and we're getting beat out of revenue. Can you help us? And Morris would say, of course, I can help you. It's going to cost you X amount of dollars. He would charge them hundreds of thousands of dollars to put a stop to those counterfeit records going into those stores. And who did he put a stop on? Himself, because he was the one that was doing it. So he would stop them, and he would actually then start doing again with another label in another company. He formed like a daisy chain of companies to continue to pull this scam on the major record labels. And I'm talking about, this is big money. This is huge money. So he pulled that quite successfully for quite some time. And of course, who was going to mess with him? They all knew his organized crime involvement. Nobody would mess with him. It was better for the record companies to pay him, and they did, the major labels. Another thing that the mob was quite involved in at that time was something called Payola. Now, you might be familiar with that term, but just so you know, it's illegal for anyone, whether it be an artist, a record label, an independent agent, to pay a DJ to push somebody's record to the top and give it more play. You can't do that, okay, unless you disclose the fact that somebody's paying you to do that, because the more airplay that a record gets, normally the better the sales. So it was a common practice. Organized crime guys would do it all the time. Morris Levy was the king of this, where he would be paying DJs under the table to push his artist label. And he had a lot of big artists at the time. I mean, Sammy Davis, Tommy James, Pearl Bailey, you name it. All the big artists in the 60s, many of them, I should say, were signed to Roulette Records. And he made a ton of money in that regard. So Payola was big. A lot of people were indicted on that at various times. It's illegal to do that. It's only legal if you disclose the fact that you're paying the DJ, but they don't want to do that. When somebody hears that they're paying somebody to push the record, well, that kind of taints the record. Nobody's going to buy it. So they would never disclose it. So Payola was huge. And even the big labels were involved in this in some way. They were hiring guys under the table to pay the DJs at the time. There was a big case, I think, with Alan Freed, who was a huge DJ at the time out of Cleveland and New York. He was involved in some Payola scam at the time. So that's one thing that Morris Levy was heavily involved in. Publishing. For those of you that are not involved in the record business or don't understand it at all, publishing is where all the money is. You write the song, you make the money. Every time that song is played by anybody at any time, Abscam, BMI, they keep a record of it, and you get paid. Well, I'll tell you what Morris used to do. He used to fraudulently put his name as one of the writers, one of the songwriters, and he would keep all the publishing. He beat a lot of his artists that way. And they were afraid to say anything because it was Morris. They knew his connections. They didn't want to say anything. He made millions in publishing, okay, millions in publishing by, again, fraudulently saying that he was one of the writers of the songs. He did that all the time. And then cutouts was another thing. He would stamp out records illegally, and he would put them in the stores. In his record store, his retail outlet, Strawberry Records, just about every record in any one of those stores, they were fraudulent. I mean, he would take some from the labels, obviously, but he would put a lot of his own cutouts in there. He would grab the master, he would make a cutout of it, he would sell it to the store for less than what the major labels were selling their record for, and he would get all the revenue. So, things like that. And, I had a little bit of a relationship with somebody that was a bodyguard to Morris Levy, good guy. His name was Nate McCullough, and he was involved in the industry also, but a really good guy. And he got in some trouble with Morris and with a couple of guys that thought he was going to turn snitch. At any rate, in 1980, he was murdered. And they say that Morris Levy was behind this. And by the way, Morris Levy died in 1990, so I'm not saying anything out of school. The guy can't get in trouble for it. And I think a lot of this information is known. My dad had a couple of run-ins with Morris Levy, and as a result, he had sit-downs with Vastola, and he had sit-downs with Tommy Eberly at the time over that. But my father did get along, and he never had, to worry about Morris Levy again, interfering in any of Buddha Kama Sutra Records, which was my father's label. So, but Mo Levy was really a force in that business, no doubt. In the mid-'80s, I believe that Morris was indicted several times, to my knowledge. I think in the mid-'80s, he was indicted on a big scheme where he allegedly was extorting a retail owner. He sold him $1 million plus in change of records. And the guy didn't want to pay Morris because he said some of the titles that should have been in there weren't in there. And Morris would then extorted him for the money. I think they beat the guy up. They put him in a hospital, something like that. Anyway, the law got involved, and Morris was indicted for that. He went to trial. He was convicted, actually. I think he was sentenced to 10 years. And while he was out on appeal, he kept appealing his conviction. He lost the appeal. He was supposed to turn himself in, I believe, in the summer of 1990, and just before he was supposed to turn himself in, he died, and died a natural death. So, but he left a big imprint behind, and again, it's just another industry that the mob was able to infiltrate successfully. The music business, the movie business. I mean, I had extensive involvement in that. A lot of my associates also did. And of course, we got close with many of the artists. There's a big story. There's always stories out there about Frank Sinatra's involvement with the mob. And of course, Frank Sinatra was a friend, to many mob guys. My father knew him well. Joe Colombo knew him well. He was friends with guys out of New Orleans and, Carlos Marcello and Trafficante and all of that. And of course, the deal that Frank Sinatra acted as a liaison between John Kennedy and the mob and Joe Kennedy and the mob. So that's another thing that we can get into at some point in time. There is truth to that. It is accurate in many, many ways. But again, I don't want to say that Frank Sinatra was a real associate of the mob. We didn't own him. He wasn't paying us, but he certainly did have some good relationships there. So that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed that. Just another industry the mob gets involved in. So we'll be back again on Monday. Is it going to be Mob Movie Monday? Is it going to be Mob Story Monday? You're going to have to wait and see. So until then, have a great weekend, blessed weekend. Thank you again for the prayers for my daughter. We're getting so many well wishes and prayers. Really appreciate that. Subscribe to the channel. A lot of stuff coming up. Darryl Strawberry, going to be interviewing him soon. Bruce McNall, that's coming up in a week or so. Great interview. You're going to love it. Remember, he brought Gretzky to National Hockey League here in America. Terrific guy. You're going to love his stories. Involved in Hollywood in a big way. You're going to love Bruce. He's a dear friend. You're going to love his stories. So that's it for the weekend. Enjoy. Be safe. Be healthy. God bless. See you next time.